Hi guys, Karina Macaroni here, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. And today I'm going to be showing you how to make a spiral dream catcher. So you can use yarn, you can use embroidery thread, you could use hemp cord, you could use, whatever string you want, and if it works for you, it works for you. You can also use a row counter to count your rows, or you don't have to. A needle would help get in between those threads, and also with weaving your yarn, you're going to need scissors, and you're going to need a ring hoop, whatever size. The smaller, the harder, the bigger, the easier, and also thicker the thread, the easier, the thinner the thread is harder. You can use whatever colors. You can use the same color. It doesn't matter. So what we're going to do is we're going to tie on our string, and I triple knot it onto my hoop so it doesn't go anywhere. But you can also put a little bit of super glue or hot glue, whatever you need to keep it in place. But if you tie it down securely and tightly, it shouldn't go nowhere. So after you tie on your thread to your hoop, whatever you're going to use to weave your threads, you're going to tie it onto or wrap it around or do whatever you need to. Now, I'm going to say that for this, when you're doing the smaller hoops, I would recommend not wrapping and just tying onto the end of a needle. And also, when you do the spacing, if you do more spacing, you're going to have a better spiral. There's going to be more to the spiral. And if you do a less spacing, it's not going to look all that great. You're going to have a very loose spiral, but it would probably be a lot easier to get in the threads. So with spacing for the little loop, I would recommend from your index finger, that first initial line to the tip. Now with like the medium to the large, the extra large, it would go up by 1 finger, 2 fingertips, 3 fingertips, 4 fingertips spacing, depending on how, keep going up depending on what size hoop you're going to be using. So after you have it tied on to your hoop and you have the end of your thread tied to your needle or whatever you're using, what we're going to do is we're going to go over and behind and through the hoop, and it's going to create like a little tiny loop at the bottom. Make sure that when you're pulling your needle through that you're not going behind where you tied your knot onto that thread right there. You're going over top of it. And you're just going to use your measurements to make sure that you're starting and ending with all the same gap length. So I'm using my pointer finger, and I'm measuring from the first initial crease in my fingertip to my fingertip. And I'm going to do that all the way around. So just to loop it the same way all the way around, we're going to go over top of it, behind it, and through the hole, making sure that our working thread is going over top of that thread that we have there hanging from the previous gap we had made. And it's going to create that little loop. And we're just going to do this all the way around, making sure that our spacing is equal. So, I also didn't mention this in the beginning, but I use the stitch marker. And if you don't know what a stitch marker is, or stitch marker progress keeper, what it is people use that for when they're knitting and crocheting to keep track of where they start and stopped, and their finishing and their ending rows, rounds, whatever. I used it to keep track of where I ended and began, if that makes sense. So when you're going around, after you do 10 rounds, you're going to start going in between the strands, and you'll have to keep track of how many rows you went in. And sometimes you can get caught up and you don't remember where you stopped and started, and sometimes it's hard to count. So I like to place a stitch marker to make sure I know where I am. So when you come to the end and you only have a little bit of a gap left, make sure that your spacing is almost close enough to the rest of yours, and make sure you try and close right next to where you began. So that thread, that one on the right is where I began, and the one on the left that I'm pulling now is where I'm ending. And just make sure that it's as close to where you started. So that little tail from tying our thread on, I like to put it through my loop so it gets covered up as I go along and not. So to continue this, what we do is we go through the loops now. Instead of going through the hoops, we go over the loop, behind it, and then we pull out, just like we did with putting the gaps in. And I just loop it around my tail end so it gets hidden, and I don't have to figure out what I'm going to do with it and where I'm going to put it, and you can't really tell. And also, if you're going to do like the stitch marker method, or if you don't have a stitch marker, you can use like a safety pin or a bobby pin, whatever, just to place there on to that first loop, so you know that's where you start and the last one's where you end. So we're going to keep going around, and we're just going to go over top of that loop, go behind it, and pull out through. And if you get a snag, I don't have any tips for that. Just try and pull it out as best as you can. But don't pull too hard to where you break your thread. But if you happen to do so, you can easily just go back and restart or fix. And I will show you how to do that with a color change later on. So just keep going through those loops. For this first round, we're just going through the loop. And remember, try to keep your tension so your spaces, like the spaces between your threads, are good and they're not hanging too loose or anything like that. So it's good to have a more tighter tension with this than not. So keep going around and just keep going through those first loops. And what we're going to be doing, and if it gets caught like that, just pull it off and it should be fine. And if you ever end up going through too many of the loops, you can always go back through and fix it by going back down through the gap loop and pulling your needle and thread out. It's a pain in the butt, but it looks better if you fix it than if you don't. Now with this, we're not making really knots, we're just looping. So it's easier to take this out, I would say. So now that we have our first round done, this is our last loop right here that we're putting on. And what we're going to be doing is, even though this is our last loop, we're going to be going around the 2 loops that we have now. So now we have 2 loops, 2 threads, 2 gap threads all the way around, and we're going to be going over both of those. So we're going to go over all of the loops that we make for 10 rounds. So we're going to have 10 rounds total, and we're going to be going over all of the loops that we're making 10 times. and we're going to keep our tension up and make sure it's tight. So I have went around 10 times over all of my threads, and now we're going to be going in between threads. So this is why I like to use like a row counter so I know what rows I'm on. I'm going to be showing you how to change colors. You don't have to. So on the last one you end on, before you end the last one, I should say, I would tie it on and leave enough thread to cover that last gap. But the next one, you want it to be that color, that opposite color if you're doing a color change. If you don't, you might lose count, or it might not look right, because when you end the last one, it starts a new round. Sorry, I'm off a camera here. I'll have to work on that. So I pull tightly. I tie it on the end. I measure how much I need for the last one, and then I tie it, and I tie a loose knot so I can move it if I have to. And I make it so it has that last color string going across the last one, and has the next color I need for the next one, if that makes sense. I'm sorry. So right here, I'm just moving the knot, and I'm pulling it up so I have the correct color I need for the last string to be woven for the last gap, and the first string for the next round. It doesn't really matter. It's not really a big deal, I guess, if you're keeping, track of where you've started and where you've ended and everything. But I like to make it look as good as possible. And now I have strings where I color changed, so I'm going to be hiding those as I go along. So now we're on to our first gap, and we're on to a new color. And we went around every single loop for 10 rounds. So now we're going to be starting, we're going to be going through the first thread. So instead of going around all of them, we're going to start going through the thread. So we're going to go through the first thread for the first round, through the second thread for the second round, and so on and so forth. So we'll be going through the threads. Now if you're doing a color change, or if you're doing the same color, I would count by 10, because we're doing 10 rounds of each. And I did 10 rounds of each until the last color. So I did put 4 colors, but you don't have to. So I just counted 10 until the last. I just kept going. So just go and put go through the first thread, and then go through the second thread, and then through the third thread, and with each round that you go. And it creates the spiral. And when you do the first 10 rounds to create the initial starting of the spiral, and as you go down the threads, it keeps going into the center, and it looks really, really neat. So right here I'm showing you, I'm finishing the first color changing round, and of course I'm out of sight. I apologize. I really need to work on that. And I'm going to be going through the second thread. And I just love that I can just loop over these threads and hide it in and make it look so much neater. And this is really giving me, like, I don't know, some Big Bird vibes or something. I don't know why. Maybe it's like the feet. Don't ask me. So I'm going through the second thread now, and I know it's hard to see. There we go. Now you can see I went through the second. So the first time with the color change, we went under the first thread. Now we're on to the second round of the color change, and we're going under the second thread. And we'll be doing that all the way till we get to the beginning. And then we'll be going under the third thread, the fourth thread, the fifth thread, and so on with the rounds of the thread, of the pink thread, or whatever color you're doing. If I don't make sense or you have any questions or anything, you can comment down below, or you can message me on Instagram, or I'm pretty sure that YouTube has a messaging option, but I'm not sure how to use it. So if you can't find me on Instagram, you can leave your contact info down below and I can get a hold of you. And yeah, whatever you need, I'll help. So after doing my rounds with the pink and the blue, 10 rounds, I did 10 rounds of white and I continued to do the white. You just keep going through the threads and it gets harder as you go down and you get to the center. And it gets a little bit spacier, and I don't really mind it. It still looks really cool. The spiral thing looks really cool, and I like it. So you just keep going and going and going and going, and eventually it'll get so small to where you can't really work in the threads anymore. Just like when you make a regular dream catcher, if you close the center, it's the same. Usually they're left open for the bad dreams to be trapped in the webbing and the good dreams to be passed through the center hole. But with this, I feel it's more of a decorative than a thing for sleep. So they're closed in the middle. So see here, it gets so hard to get those little threads. And so you just put them wherever you can fit them to get that center to close. And I think that the spiral looks really cool. I've done a few in different color combinations, but I think the next one I'm going to do, I think I'm going to try and do a one color, just one solid straight color through, maybe like a light color. I'm not very sure. I like the color changed ones though. They look really nice. You can put some beads and feathers on. You can put a loop at the top. You can do whatever you want. Decorate however you want now that you've finished the center of the hoop. So I like to close it off in the center and then I tie it up. I put the needle in the back and I make a knot in the back. So this is the front of the Dreamcatcher spiral Dreamcatcher, and then the back you can tell because you'll have different like spaces between the colors and stuff from doing color changes and stuff like that. So I just go through the loops behind and make a knot, and I do this twice, and then I cut. So I hope that you have enjoyed this, and like I said, if you got lost or you need extra help or anything, comment down below, find me on Instagram, leave your information, whatever you need to do, and I will help you out. I hope that you enjoyed this, and I can't wait to see if some of you tag me in these beautiful dream catchers. I can't wait to see if you make some. So anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell so you know when I upload, because I got some more tutorials coming your way. I don't know what I'm going to be doing, but I do have some more coming your way. So let's just look at this beautiful spiral. Bye, guys!